Good afternoon. Welcome to All About Animals. I'm Sherry Gradator, and my guest today is Jen Berlinghof, who is an environmental educator for the Lake County Forest Preserve District. We are at the Greenbelt Forest Preserve in North Chicago in their educational room, and we're here to talk about cranes. You may have seen these gigantic birds flying overhead because they're all arriving about now, aren't they?
Yep, that's right.
Yes, the cranes are coming.
They're coming back.
And I don't know a whole lot about cranes, Jen, so I'm handing this to you, and you can tell them about the cranes.
All right, sounds good. Well, Sandhill Cranes are really large, elegant birds that we are fortunate enough in Lake County to see nesting in our forest preserves and surrounding areas at beginning in March and April right now. So over here we've got Sandhill Crane Mount. This one in the back is a juvenile crane. It's about a year old, and it was found, it was unfortunately hit by a car and then donated to the Forest Preserve District. And so we had it taxidermied and we use it as an educational piece to teach people about animals. And then the smaller crane in the front is a chick, so a young crane, and that was found at Lakewood Forest Preserve, and it had died for unknown causes, we're not sure, and so also was donated and used in our educational program. So you can see it's large, and it can get larger than this. They can be about 4.5 feet tall with a wingspan of about 6 feet.
Amazing.
Yep, once they're an adult, we kind of faked it with this juvenile here. They normally don't have the red patch on their head until they're over 1, but this one we added it just so we can show people what the adult would look like. And so we'll talk a little bit about their life. They come to Lake County and further north to nest, basically. Here's an example of their wings also donated, and you can see they have great camouflage. And this brown color comes from one of their pre-nesting behaviors. So when they arrive to this area, they're coming in migration from Florida. So a lot of people hang out in Florida in the winter, and a lot of cranes do too. And they're coming up the Mississippi Flyway, and they have to stop along the way. Migration is really difficult for cranes. You'll often see them flying in groups, and they catch warm air thermals as they're flying so that they can kind of glide and conserve energy on these flights. They do have to make a pit stops along the way, just like people would have to if we were driving from Florida.
Well, they have to eat, don't they?
Right, they have to stop to eat, and they have to stop to rest. And so they do that in 2 different kinds of areas. Here in a wetland area, and they like to eat there and stop. And what they'll eat in a wetland is maybe some frogs, some plants, and some crayfish. And then they also like to stop in fields. And some fields that they find really great stopping points are farm fields along the way. They'll eat corn, soybeans. They'll also find voles and insects in those fields. So they do make a lot of stops along the way, and we do find many of them nesting here in Lake County, and this is their final stop. Some use our area just as another stop and go further north to Canada, but some we find nesting here. Now historically, these birds, about the 1890s, kind of disappeared from this area. A sad story of overhunting and just habitat destruction. And it wasn't until about 100 years later that we started to see nesting cranes in our area. So there was about 100 years where these cranes existed in other places, but not here in Lake County. And since the late 1980s, we've seen them increase their nesting in Lake County due to basically protection of their habitats, the wetlands and the prairies, and to elimination of hunting in Illinois of these sandhill cranes. So when they come back up here, they're looking for a mate, or they're mating up, and they're gonna build a nest. And so right behind you is kind of a sample sandhill crane nest. They actually build their nests in a marsh or in the water, and they mound it up with wetland plants, and they use that kind of as a safe zone, with the water being like a moat around them. So that helps the adults to see and hear if any predators are around and protect their babies. Before they even build the nests, however, the cranes go through some courtship rituals. They do some dancing. They paint their feathers with mud, which is what gives them that kind of
The rusty look.
Rusty color, yeah, because the mud often has a lot of iron in it, and that helps them to camouflage. These are birds that, although we see often in the air during migration, once they're in their habitats, they're a little more difficult to spot. And that's kind of by design. They don't really like to be near where there's a lot of human activity, which is another reason that we saw a decline in their populations. They need kind of big spaces that have both the wetland and the prairie. And so once they do their dancing and their painting and their singing, it's like a Broadway show, then they build their nest together, the mom and dad. And so they pile up these wetland plants, and typically they'll lay 2 eggs each year. And I'll show you, we have some little mock-up of the eggs. This is about the size of the egg, and they'll weigh about as much as an average, like a medium-sized orange would weigh. And you can see the egg is really well camouflaged.
It's green.
Yeah, it's kind of a greenish gray. It has speckles on it. And most of the time, 2 chicks will hatch. But often with a lot of birds, there's some sibling rivalry. And the chick that hatches first, they'll hatch a few days apart. And the chick that hatches first usually outcompetes the younger chick for food. So typically only 1 chick will survive to adulthood.
So this is not a tremendously prolific.
Exactly. Yeah. So it has a hard time. You can see why the numbers would go down, because they only have 1 chick a year, typically, to kind of reproduce and help the species
So basically
carry
it
on.
takes 2 to make 1.
Right.
Yeah.
Now in years where there's a lot of food and they have a nice protected nest, 2 chicks could survive. But it's not as typical for that to happen.
You have feet.
I have feet, yes. So another neat adaptation of a sandhill crane is that it has really long legs, really long beak, and that helps them eat, but these legs are also pretty waxy feeling. And so it's almost like a lot of our kids come to our programs with these rubber boots on. It's almost like the cranes are wearing their own little rubber boots, and that helps them to keep dry in the wetlands when they're standing.
And very sharp nails on the end of
Yeah,
that.
very sharp nails help with protection. So if a crane was to feel threatened, they'd be most likely to use their legs and feet to defend themselves. Some of their predators include mink, raccoons, fox, coyote.
Will a fox go after a bird that big?
Typically, these predators are going to go after the weak ones, the young ones, the injured ones. Most adult cranes that are healthy, there's not much that's going to really mess with them. But even great horned owls have been known to take chicks out of a nest.
Wow.
So yeah, they'll go after them if they can find them, for sure. It's a hard life, and one really great thing about the sandhill cranes kind of bouncing back is that sandhill cranes are considered an indicator species. So because they're so picky about their habitats, and because they eat such a wide variety of foods, they really need to have a high quality area, natural area to live in. And if we see sandhill cranes nesting in one of our forest preserves, we know automatically that we might have a wide variety of other animals there.
It means you're doing your job well.
Right, yeah.
That's what it means.
Right, so some of the great places in the area to see sandhill cranes are Rollins Savannah, Middle Fork Savannah, Lakewood Forest Preserve. There's a pair that has nested in the kind of farm field.
Are they in Volobog?
Volobog, yes.
Yeah,
Chain of Lakes State Park is another great place to see them. And something really interesting that's happening this weekend is we have our annual Midwest Crane Count. And that's the second Saturday in April every year at 5 a.m. A group of hardy volunteers head out to different sites all over the county. And this is happening all over the Midwest. And they count cranes. And this gives us a really good picture of how many nesting cranes we have in the area. And this is really coordinated, at our level we have a coordinator in the Forest Preserve, but it's really coordinated by the International Crane Foundation, which is in Baraboo, Wisconsin. And they're kind of the place to go if you want to know anything about cranes.
So what my assumption is, if you see, obviously there are areas with escalating crane populations every year, and that means that those areas are environmentally healthy.
Sure.
Yeah, and it gives you, I mean, when they do a crane count, the number of cranes has to be indicative of
Right.
Just how well we're doing our job.
Yeah, so we're happy to say that they've been on the rise, and we're happy to say that they're making a comeback.
The distance that these cranes travel.
Yeah, and so the ones that are coming through our area are going from Florida and sometimes just stopping off and going all the way into Canada. And then these others on the other flyways are going up to Alaska. So it is pretty amazing. So they need a lot of help along the way, not just areas preserved here in our area, but along the way, the preservation of wetlands and prairies, farmlands for these birds.
And you've mentioned the word, and I'd like you to define it, flyway, a couple of times.
Sure.
People don't know what a flyway is. I don't know what a flyway is.
Okay, so flyways are just areas where large populations of birds fly back and forth during their migration path. Yeah, and they're typically along the coasts and along big rivers. So water is a great guideline for migration. Mm-hmm. And so the flyway that comes right through northern Illinois is called the Mississippi Flyway. And that's what we've seen.
Because it follows the river.
Correct, yeah.
And you know, we talked about this, and I'd really like to get the word out about what happens in the fall in a certain area of Indiana.
Sure, yeah. The cranes that you see here are going to migrate in the fall. After they've had their babies, they'll bring their young with them, and they're going to migrate back down to Florida. And the time of year they do that is typically in November, and a really big resting and stopping area, it's called a migration trap. It sounds like a bad thing, and it can be, but it actually is, it can be very good, and it's where these big groups of animals gather together. And so for the Sandhill Cranes coming from Lake County, Illinois, one of those great areas is called Jasper, Pulaski wildlife area near Valparaiso, Indiana. And it's a place where you can see tens of thousands of cranes all gathered in one area at one time. And November is the time to do that.
And if you can picture birds that are up to 4 feet tall,
yeah.
and thousands of them in one place. Mm-hmm. It's the most impressive thing to see.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Now they have a very distinctive call too, don't they?
Yeah, it kind of sounds like a trumpeting sound, and you can hear them do that call when they greet their mate, when they greet their young, when they are around each other.
And even when they fly over.
Yeah, so that's one way. Often they're flying so high that we can't really see them, but we can hear them, and we know they're passing by.
They're coming.
They're coming back.
They're coming. They're coming to, well, they're all over. I've seen them.
You're right.
Mm-hmm. And I love seeing them because they're such remarkable birds.
They are.
And they spend a lot of time on the ground.
Yeah, they do. Once they're here, they're kind of hanging out and walking around, eating, feeding.
Yeah. Because I see them on the ground more than I see them flying in the summertime.
Yeah, because they're nesting and protecting their babies and their nest at that time of year.
So if you see a very tall bird that looks like it might be a very small person,
right?
Because I'm 5 foot nothing, which means that they would come up to here on me.
Yep.
So if you see a very tall bird that looks like it might be a very small person, and it's gray or it's tan, or when they've painted themselves, I've seen them where they're absolutely shockingly rust-colored. You know that you are in the presence of Sandhill Cranes. And you know that wherever you are, it's a good place to be for you. Because if it's healthy for the cranes, it's healthy for the people.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for talking to us.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it. We're now going to take you to Save a Pet and show you some of the dogs and cats available there for adoption.